welcome to Directly Correct, a P-Lines podcast with Cole and Scott. Today's guest, Toby Culshaw.
Hey, Directionally Correct fans, we're off this week, so here's a replay of a previous episode we thought you'd like. If you're looking to stay connected to the podcast, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter on Substack to get behind-the-scenes information, watch our videos on YouTube, or check out other episodes of the podcast on your app of choice. Thanks for listening. Directionally Correct is dedicated to you, our listeners, to help educate and entertain you on how to effectively do people analytics. By supporting this podcast, you are helping us continue to provide valuable insights and knowledge to our listeners. Please consider becoming a patron of the podcast. You can find the link to sign up in the show notes or at patron.podbean.com/directionallycorrect. Thanks for your support. All opinions are our own and do not reflect those of any other organization.
Dang, what have you been living it up?
Well, I was meant to book a holiday, but I forgot. I'm not very good at that.
You get around to it someday.
Yeah, well, I've got this week off and next week off because next week we're doing a talent intelligence conference in Amsterdam. So I wanted to take time off. I didn't want to do that within work because you know how work can get. You don't want to be focusing on other stuff. So yeah, I've got next week off for that. But yeah, this week I thought we'd go away somewhere. Just didn't get around to it at all, and so we've had loads of day trips. So I've got 3 boys, and so it's been lots of days out beach, and then today we were rowing boats down a river. So it's been very pleasant. It's been very pleasant.
Well, what's this conference? Do you want to plug it at all?
I'm quite happy to. I don't really mind though. I don't really get too pressured with this stuff. It's a talent intelligence conference in Amsterdam. I'm doing with so it's the Talent Intelligence Collective. Obviously, it's the TI thing I run, but then we're doing it with Strategens and the Intelligence Group over in the Netherlands. But it's I think the first full-on in-person TI conference ever. We did a virtual one last year for the Jamboree, so Talent Intelligence Collective Jamboree. But I don't think anyone's done a pure play TI conference before, and I can see why. It was a right pain.
Yeah, I was like, putting together a conference is miserable, and it's like, and what if no one shows up? That's the worst part.
Yeah, and luckily the intelligence group have been handling like all the logistics stuff. I've got to give them huge props. They've done all the hard work, but it's hard because TI is still a really niche field. There aren't too many people that do it. And so many people have just had their travel budget smashed. So it's like, well, yeah, doing an in-person one, we probably haven't timed this particularly well, if I'm going to be honest with you. But
Well, you pick an awesome place like Amsterdam to travel to, though.
It is quite a cool place. Like I was really lucky. I used to work at Philips, so a big Dutch tech company. So I used to go to Amsterdam quite a lot, and it's amazing how quickly you kind of take it for granted and become blasé with this stuff. But it's a cool city. It is a cool city.
I mean, speaking of, I was just in Amsterdam probably about a month ago. And, just like cruise around the streets, you look at all the canals and all this sort of stuff. It's absolutely amazing. And a mother and daughter were passing the opposite direction. I could overheard the daughter say, like, "Mom, like, everywhere looks the same here." It's like, yeah, that's actually quite true.
It is. Like, it's so easy to get lost in that city because all the canals, there's no distinguishing features. They all, unless you like really know your bridges, and then you can kind of bridges are which bridges. But for all intents and purposes, it all looks the same. It's a great place. It's a great place.
You ever been to Amsterdam, Cole?
I have not. I've only been to Europe one time, and it was for my high school trip, and I went to London and a few other places, but never been over there. Well, Toby, do you mind if I introduce you real quick, just for the audience's sake? So Toby Culshaw is the talent intelligence leader at Worldwide Amazon Stores. Like you mentioned, you're previously global head of talent intelligence and executive recruitment research at Royal Philips. He's also the founder of the Talent Intelligence Collective, a talent intelligence mentor at Utter, and a co-host of the Talent Intelligence Collective podcast. So thanks for joining us today, Toby. I think we've used that word a few times now, talent intelligence. What is that? and actually, more importantly, can you tell us what it is not? Because I see a lot of people calling themselves talent intelligence nowadays, and I'm like, no, you're not. So can you tell us about that?
Yeah, for sure. So it's a hotly debated topic, is the honest answer. So I got really into it a few years back, and we can talk about that, like my past a bit more if you want later. But through that, I really wanted to set a parameter of what is TI. What do we mean by this stuff? Because I felt uh, really strongly that it wasn't what a lot of people were using. It wasn't sourcing intelligence. It wasn't exec research. It was something different. So I started the group off, and we can talk about that if you want later. But we started messing around with definitions. And when I was doing the benchmarking study a couple of years back, we started really looking at the definitions people were using. And it was fascinating for me that the definition that vendors were using was different from the definitions that analysts were using, which was different from the definition that TI practitioners were using. And we were all seeing things slightly differently. Broadly, though, it's using external labor market data, whether it's about skills or jobs or people or companies, whatever it may be, to affect decision making processes within organizations is the broad definition. And that's the definition we kind of got to through the benchmarking study. And that's broadly the definition that I used within the book I used as well. I would say there's probably a risk element there as well. It's often to de-risk that decision-making process. But broadly, it's using external labor market data and then wrapping it in with some kind of internal data, wrapping it with some kind of analytics or intel or science type element to affect decision-making processes.
I mean, like, let's dig a little bit deeper in there, Toby. So you say how do those two things like commingle? So you use external labor market data as a comparison base to.
Yeah, I'd say this will probably answer a question we'll discuss later as well, which is how does it differ? And Cole, I know you mentioned how does it differ from other things. And I'd say that's one of the core bits is how does it differ for, say, people analytics? And I'd say traditionally people analytics is got a very structured, defined data set and data criteria that you can control. And you're coming very much from usually a heavy technical background with an eye to the external. But it's the external is there to help set the context, but it's not really the main focus of the function. TI is the inverse. It's like the yin and the yang. Traditionally, people aren't coming from a hardcore data background. We're using the vendor landscape more for that hardcore heavy lifting data analytics, forecasting type piece, and we're more that conduit to the business and that data translator. So it's kind of the yin and the yang. I'd say one thing that's really coming through in the last couple of years is how many more teams are standing up more technical capabilities within TI teams, but also how many more people analytics, HR analytics teams, strategic workforce planning teams are starting to go, well, actually, we need to understand this context a little bit more to understand what we've got here. And it's messy. It really is messy because you can end up with some really structured, take a job taxonomy, really structured data internally. You know what your software engineer 1, 2, or 3 looks like. You know what your principal looks like. You know what it all means. That doesn't mean anything to the rest of the world. It doesn't mean anything could align. It doesn't mean that any of the national taxonomies are going to align even remotely with what you've got. So a lot of the initial stages with TI is to really go, well, this is what we've got and this is what they've got. How do they actually play together? How do they align? Because quite often they don't. An example, customer service assistant. We had a job at Philips, customer service. Every other customer service role you generally are going to look at will be your first line support for a call center. You've bought tickets to the Super Bowl and you can't get through. You're phoning up your customer service, customer support. Customer service for us was first line engineering support to help fix an MRI machine. Now, that's an entirely different proposition to what most customer service roles were. And so if you stayed at the surface level of like job taxonomy, all of your benchmarking data is going to be completely wrong. Any kind of data to look at total addressable market, if you're looking to launch a new site, for example, it's going to be completely wrong. So a lot of it initially is really that unpicking of what do we actually mean by this? What are you actually talking about here? Because quite often we'll, within our professional lives, use shorthand of, I need a software engineer or I need a finance controller or whatever it is. You need use a shorthand of a job title or whatever it may be. And actually, you really need to dig into that a lot more because it doesn't translate cleanly to the external world at all.
And I know that you two actually just wrote a article together.
Yeah, it was back in March. We wrote an article.
Oh, March. It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a little while. Called "Talent Intelligence as Competitive Intelligence," and I thought this was kind of an interesting angle. And I'll stop sharing real quick because it's kind of bugging me.
Yeah.
But I think, Toby, and I would be curious to get your perspective on this, because the big question I have, so I understand merging the external data with the internal data, and I think that there's a lot of use cases to do that effectively, one of which we dug into about competitive intelligence. But why is that useful? Why is that different? Why is that useful? How does it help organizations? Obviously, we had some examples in the article, but I'd love to just get your perspective in general.
Yeah. So I'd say there's a couple of different angles. The broader piece around TI, and I'm not going to be a politician and dodge the question. I will loop back, but it's going to sound like a weird answer at first. The vast majority of TI is location feasibility. If you talk to most talent intelligence teams, and I run this benchmarking survey, we just run it again for this year, you're looking at like 60, 70% of all work going through talent intelligence teams is location feasibility, full stop. The vast majority is around that. Now, within that, you're going to have lots of different elements. You can have compensation benchmarking, you're going to have talent flow analytics, you're going to have total addressable market, and you're going to have competitive intelligence. But the vast majority is around that location decision. Where competitive intelligence is strong, you can use it in a number of different angles. You can use it on what I'd say is a fairly safe plane. Digging into competitors to understand their organizational structure. Are they loaded top heavy? Do they have a very strong credit control function versus the rest of the industry? In actual fact, we had an organization where we were doing some digging into it in a previous company, for an M&A activity. And we could see that the company had a really strange structure compared to all of our peer group companies we were digging into. And they essentially had a very large credit control team compared to everyone else. It was magnitudes higher. And when we went back to the strategy team, the M&A team, we were saying, look, this is just weird. To us, we're no experts in this bit, but it looks like they're really good at selling the product. Everyone's great. They really want the product, but no one's paying for it. No one wants to pay for what they're selling. And it was true. When we were doing the due diligence, we were looking at the cash flows. They didn't have any money. They just couldn't get the cash flow going through. And that's where I'd say competitive intelligence really comes in. It's where you're doing the stuff that you shouldn't really necessarily be doing as a traditional HR function. And I know we want to talk about weaponizing TA later on, but it's where you're using the labor market data in a different way. So looking at job adverts to see how competitors pivoting their skill sets, how are they pivoting their locations, how are they investing in their new markets or new R&D spend, for example. And we've seen that in companies as well, where we could see companies pivoting and launching whole new areas, whole new business lines, whole new markets, and they hadn't told the broader market about it. It hadn't been announced to Wall Street. But the companies I was at, we could go to our leadership and say, actually, we can see these companies are pivoting. We need to be aware of this because it's going to hit our market share, or it's going to hit our product line, or whatever it may be.
No, I love that. And you literally, I know we alluded to it a second ago, but I want to make sure we link to it in the show notes, because you literally wrote a book called Talent Intelligence. And it goes through a lot of these examples of very tangible, very tactical ways that talent intelligence can be used beyond just, location strategy, which I think all of us are pretty familiar with, or if you're familiar with the space, you're pretty familiar with that. I did want to kind of pivot though. You lead this group called Talent Intelligence Collective, which, as a person who's tried to kick off groups before and has tried to kick off conferences before too, you are a glutton for punishment, first of all, knowing that you're doing this. But tell us a little bit about that group. I've kind of crashed your party a few times. I love what you all are doing. Like, tell us about this group and how can people get involved if they're interested?
Yeah, I agree. It is a bit of glutton for punishment at times, and you definitely go see the energies ebb and flow as it goes. And with all these things, there's going to be kind of a pivot point and economies of scale, and eventually it will self fulfill. But yeah, the TIC was essentially my way of dodging having to actually arrange regular calls. Ironically, I ended up arranging regular calls from it. But it started off where I was just when I was forming the team at Philips, I wanted to benchmark. This was a newly created TI team. I wanted to know what good looked like in this space. Who are the best people doing this stuff? And so I reached out to a few people, and I couldn't really find many teams doing it. But I found a few people that were doing this sort of work from people analytics teams or from HR analytics teams. And so I started having a regular monthly call, and then that started getting a bit ropey, so we shifted that to a quarterly call, and I realised I was really not the person to be setting the agenda on this stuff and keeping everyone on a really tight ship. And I was like, this isn't working. Let's create a Facebook group so we can all just drop in there and chat things asynchronously, and we can just run a bit more fluidly. And so I did that and created the group, and we called it the Talent Intel Collective. We just kept running off the back of that. It's really evolved. It really has, and I'm very grateful to everyone in the community, because it's grown through the individuals. We do a couple of different monthly calls, we do virtual meetups, we do various different things, but a lot of it is through the individuals. It's the individuals giving their time, it's the individuals giving their wisdom and their insight, because a lot of this is new. The vast majority of people standing up these talent intel teams are sub 5 people teams, and the vast majority have been created in the last 5 years. In actual fact, a huge majority have been created in the last 2 years. And so there aren't people to really benchmark this stuff off. And that's where also the book came from, was, I'd have lots of calls with people just to give them ideas around how they could set these teams up, what it could look like. And invariably at the end of it, every single time, it was like, that's been really great. What can I read about this? And at the time, there was a couple of articles. We'd done a white paper when I was at Phillips. Malik and Poles did it. But we didn't. There wasn't really a kind of a chunky, substantive body of work to say, here you go, read this. This will help guide you. And so that's kind of what I did with the book, was just to give people an idea of, like, this is the current state of play. I'm not saying it's the panacea, it's not the answer for everything, but that was where I saw the world going at that time. And yeah, luckily it seems to be landing pretty well, and people are pretty happy with it.
And you can also stop by the Talent Intelligence Collective and get a sticker or mug, right? Support the group, right?
You can.
I popped in there yesterday. I saw your blog. It's got all sorts of great info in there.
I should have been wearing my swag today, shouldn't I? Yeah, I forgot about that.
We need to send you swag too. Let's send you a little button or something.
Well, honestly, I'm not very good at doing things the proper way. Generally, I look at kind of easy lift solutions that I can use wrongly to do what I need. So I needed a website to kind of host some of this stuff, and to put, if we wanted to put templates down, if we wanted to put reports out there, etc. I wanted a nice, easy way we could have it as like a central hub where people can just grab all this stuff. And the Google Sheets thing wasn't really working, so I thought, well, what's an easy solution? And I saw Shopify, but obviously to create that, you need some kind of producty type piece as well. So I ended up creating a bit of swag there. So some people have been very generous and jumped into it and grabbed a load of swag, which is it makes me chuckle. It's amazing.
How many bomber jackets have you sold yet?
Not many. I think there's only one bomber jacket. But the bits that made me chuckle is because I didn't, I'm no retailer. I don't know what I'm doing with that stuff at all. So I hadn't accounted for like local taxes or any of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Quite a lot of it. People were buying it, ringing it up. It was great. It looked like a really healthy, amount they're spending to support the group, but it would cost me money because I hadn't accounted for the taxes. So I ended up spending out more than they'd spent on the product. So it went a bit horribly awry, but yeah, it works as a hub. Like the reality is, like the product, if you want to buy it, it's great support, but it works as a hub. Like to store templates, to have the kind of the blogging bit going on there, it does work as a pretty decent hub solution, to be honest.
And like I said, everyone should stop by there and like check it out because there's lots of great information on there. But let's circle back to your book. Like you say, you don't do things the normal way, and you kind of laid out why you wrote the book. But how did you write the book? Like right now, I'm writing a book chapter, and it's the worst fucking thing on earth. And I know Cole was gonna write a book, but like I don't know if it's still going or not. No,
no, that thing. Materialized and unmaterialized like 10 times.
Yeah.
And I finally just gave up on it.
I tip my hat to you guys because trying it's hard. It's really brutal. So I started off by I mentioned earlier that people were asking me like where's the body of work we can read. So I thought, all right, I'll start putting some ideas down. And initially I was just going to launch it as a series of like LinkedIn articles or blog posts or whatever. Just going to have a series of articles. And then somebody introduced me to their publishing editor. And the publishing editor and I had a chat, and I wasn't really at first taking it too seriously in terms of writing the book. I was like, all right, I'll have a chat. Let's see where it goes. And then we had the conversation, and it went well. And you kind of go through the whole publishing editing process of whether they sign off on the book and everything else. Honestly, for the first 6 months, I'd written about 15,000 words. And it got to the end of the year, so December prior, and the book was due in the March, and I was like, all right, I'll write it over Christmas. I'll write it over the Christmas period. It'd be lovely sitting down with a mince pie or
Yep.
whatever. Clearly, none of that happened.
Big plans. Yeah.
Didn't happen at all. So got into the new year, and suddenly I was like, I've got a month left, and I need to deliver this thing. And they were like, you've got to deliver this. So it suddenly hit home, and it was a lot of late nights. We extended the deadline once, and then I was like, right, done. There's your 50,000 words. It's all done. And they're like, that's great, but you're meant to do 60,000 words. I was like, cracking. Better find another 10,000 words. So then I had to do the final 10,000 in, I think it was about 2 weeks. I wouldn't say the book I've done, I wouldn't say it's a hard book to write because it's fairly structured. It's discrete units, discrete chapters. You do it whether you're looking at data security or data architecture or standing up a team or the future of TI. It's fairly discrete units that you can chunk into quite nicely. So I think anyone could do it, but it is a lot of work. And even once you finish, you think, all right, done, delivered, there you go. Then it goes through all the editing, and then you've got to do the redrafts, and then the editing, and the redrafts, and it takes
God.
a lot of time. But it was a great experience. It really was.
It's like dissertations, right? You think you're done, like, oh hell no, you're not done.
Exactly that.
Well, so Toby, I've got one really big question in this space. It's been bugging me about talent intelligence, and we kind of addressed it at one of the orgnostic sessions we had through the lounge on talent intelligence a few weeks ago. The one with AJ Herman and Travis Windling and Ben Zweig. And I think you were there in attendance, where I brought up this concept. If you hear a lot about skills-based organizations now and skills taxonomies, and so I kind of cleverly brought one person from each background, one person who was advocating for a skills-based organization, one for task-based looks at talent intelligence, and then another based on role-based looks at talent intelligence. Mm-hmm. Where do you come down on this debate? Because I hear about skills relentlessly. I hear about it all the time. Yeah. What's your model? How do you look at this? What is are all three of those even talent intelligence? Tell us about it.
Yeah, so all of that can comfortably fall into TI. And that's the beauty and the danger of TI, because it can definitionally end up being super broad. And you can end up with TI teams on the face of it look exactly the same. You dig into their work, totally different. But I could go off on a huge tangent there, so I won't. I think there's a lot of focus on the skills-based hiring and skills-based organizational structures, etc. at the moment. I don't think it's feasible. I just don't. And the reason being is I don't think most companies have a really good handle on what skills they have. Even if you've got a really good learning management system, if you're capturing all that information, if you've got your talent cards that people fill in once a year, you're still missing probably 70% of the on-the-job learning that people do in the skills development they're doing through that whole yearly period, unless they're permanently updating their talent cards or permanently updating the LMS, which I don't think most people are. You could then kind of have more intelligent systems and start doing inferred skills and starting to look at, okay, what do other people within that have? Okay, it's likely that person has it. I just don't think we're geared up for that. There are obviously a lot of the vendors are pushing the skills-based hiring. It's often the vendors that have great skills taxonomies and great platforms that will give you
what a coincidence.
Skills-based information. It's a very strange coincidence. I think for me, it's the downstream impact of it all, though. Like if I hire Scotty for your skill set, not against a job family, not against a job framework, but your skills, well, I now need a whole comp structure to marry against skills taxonomies, not job frameworks. So now that's got to be redone. And then how do we manage that? So suddenly the traditional hierarchy of work and the hierarchy of an organization doesn't really necessarily work out if you're managing to skills and to project outcomes rather than for job families. So I think there's a whole load of downstream impact of this skills-based hiring that people haven't really necessarily thought through. What it really, I think, will come down to is what I think at its heart it's meant to be is, all right, let's still probably hire against jobs, but let's just broaden skills. Let's broaden what we're looking for and not pigeonhole people into you're only in this job family. If you've got this skill set, you can have some parallel skills that sit across. And I think that's probably where it will end up is actually we're just broadening out as skill bases rather than an actual skills-based hiring.
Those skills are a real deal. So, like, imagine you're hiring an IO psychologist, right? Fantastic. You do that. If you want someone that knows like how to code, that's a little more rarefied. If you want someone that knows, say, NLP or ML, that's even more rarefied.
Mhm.
I imagine you got to be you expect to be paid for this sort of rarefied skill set, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. Completely agree.
Well, I think, and let me jump in here. I think, I think everyone understands that perspective, Scott, and it seems really like a valid perspective. I think where the challenge comes in is the folks that are pushing, we're just going to get rid of the concept of jobs. And now all you are, you're not a person working in a job. You are just a collection of skills. And that's going to manifest itself in a skills-based organization. And we're going to be able to do things very fluidly. And that's where you kind of lose me is like, okay, well, I think we're still going to have jobs in the future. I don't think we're all going to be 1099 employees who like act like Uber drivers of machine learning, you know,
It takes
or
an incredible amount of architecture on the front end.
exactly.
And it would be amazing. Like I remember having conversations with the head of people analytics at Philips when I was there way back, and we were talking about how could we have. It was when the gig economy was like the really hot topic of everyone, and I was like, how can we build gig economy flexibility and agility and freedom within an enterprise organization? And we were talking about kind of that whole how would that work? And I think it was very similar, conceptually in my brain for this. Is if you're being hired against a skill, great, coming in, you need to essentially sell your services internally within organizations and to get the work coming in, because if you're not in a specific job, you might not have a structured workload coming in. You need to go out and sell your services and sell your skills. I think it really does call for an entire shakeup of the whole HRIS landscape to make that work properly.
Toby, just very quickly, you're based in the UK, correct?
Yep.
Like, what are the differences that you see working in the UK for, say, an American-centric company?
Oh, good question.
Is there like an inhibiting factor? Is there a
I think there's
benefit to it?
Yeah, I think there's from a kind of skills.
They allowed for more radical beard game on, you know, like feel like you're just rocking it.
Do you know, this has been a relatively recent growth, but yes. Do you know what? I think there's definitely some benefits. You know, there are some great skill sets, access to Europe, etc., etc. I think there's some real challenges as well that comes with it. And one of my favorite books is The Culture Map, which talks around cultural norms and how different cultures work within an organizational structure and an organizational setting. And I think there's you definitely see that within the British employees within US companies because of the communication style. You know, US is traditionally much more direct. The British, we like to beat around the bush. We like to go around in circles. So you definitely see some communication styles, communication challenges, etc. I think more generally, I think the UK we have traditionally some pretty solid talent bases. We've got some good hubs. We've got some good infrastructure and stuff. So it's a good place to land. It's probably not as appealing post Brexit. Is the reality of it. You're suddenly going, well, actually, I can go into Germany or France, etc. as well. So it's probably not quite as appealing. But we're still seeing a lot of investment coming in.
I sprung that on you. I was curious.
No, I'm very laissez-faire with this thing. Spring anything, I don't mind.
How long is that beard going to get then? And we're going to spring anything?
Yeah.
I'm still debating whether I'm going to go kind of Sons of Anarchy or whether I am actually some kind of pirate. I'm not too sure.
A little mustache wax, Do
you know, it all started because I had a beard for years, and so my wife turned around to me one day and went, "You realise you keep it so short, people just think you haven't shaved for a day." And then I started growing it out. I had somebody that I'd genuinely worked with for about 7 years turn around to me and went, "Oh, you've grown a beard. How long have you had a beard for?" And I was like, "The entire time we've known each other, 7 years." They had no idea I'd even been bothering to try and grow a beard for that period.
You could make an argument they had beard blindness. Have you ever heard of this like term face blindness? Like people
yeah.
who meet other people but can't recognize them.
Prosopagnosia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well done. Way to
Good
go,
knowledge.
Scott.
That's a great pub quiz knowledge there, isn't it? Just pull all that out.
Full of it. Or the people that have like phantom limb syndrome, like they lost their arm and still think it's there.
I wonder if I'm going to have phantom beard syndrome when I cut this off eventually. I'll be stroking the beard that doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. I think I have the inability to remember people's names. That's my face blindness, name blindness.
Yeah. My thing with the beard is, if you cut the beard or if I cut my beard, it's like phantom beard, real double chin.
Oh.
Trying to mask that big guy.
Hiding a lot under here. Hiding a lot.
It's adaptive. Helps you out. Well, you two want to do a little confusion matrix?
Let's do it.
Do it.
The confusion matrix.
All right, Toby. We're gonna do a pick your poison. All right. So we give you two options. You get to pick whichever one you want, and we'll roll with it.
Let's do it.
Okay. 1, the most embarrassing element in your music library, or 2, the weirdest skill you've learned on the job.
Oh, I'll go the worst music. I'll give you 2 as a little treat. My first ever concert was a Bananarama concert, which I don't even know how big Bananarama were across the pond, but Bananarama concert, and I fell asleep during it. I fell asleep before they even got on there. I was in the stands with my dad, and my sisters were down in the what would have been a pit in any other based Bananarama. So that is a pit. But yeah, they were down there. I fell asleep before they came in. My first single I ever bought was "Crocodile Shoes" by Jimmy Nail.
Crocodile Shoes. Okay.
Crocodile Shoes, but it's a terrible song. He was basically an actor from the north of England, and he did a song called "Crocodile Shoes," and it's pretty terrible. But I have quite an eclectic taste of music, and I'm quite open to terrible songs.
Well, sometimes you need it. It's comforting, right?
It's true, and I particularly doing the sort of work we do. When I'm writing papers, when I'm doing research, I have to have music on. I can't sit in silence. I have different types of genre that I will hit for, like if I'm writing a paper versus doing research for a paper versus doing different bits, I'll have different genres that I hit for different things.
So like what like we're doing a lit review. What are we listening to?
I'd probably do something pretty chilled. So I'd probably do like whiskey blues or something like that. Put some kind of whiskey blues compilation on YouTube.
All right. We're doing some hardcore conclusion writing. What are we doing?
Doc writing, as you know, is a big thing. I go for some pretty aggressive metal, not hyper aggressive, but stuff like Slipknot or something like that. I'll get in there and get that blasting in the background.
I need to read some of your dogs. Yeah,
exactly. I think it's the beats per minute. I think that's what triggers me when I need to like really focus. I need something higher beats per minute versus when it's a bit more chilled.
What was your first album, Cole?
The first one I bought?
Yeah.
I honestly don't remember, but I'm just gonna say In Sync. just to be funny, because it was probably one of my first 10 I bought, and I remember that one being pretty early.
That's guilty pleasure music, right? Dance in the Mirror.
Well, when you're a kid, it's not even a guilty pleasure. It's just like, this is good music.
It's a pleasure.
I don't know. What about you?
Like most embarrassing song in my library, probably like Lynn, "Steal My Sunshine," or Barbie Girl. That's in there.
Oh yeah.
Boy, it's been like about 4 years, but I got called a boomer because I still have an MP3 collection. Yeah,
you're not a boomer. I mean, I feel like those are transferable.
Yeah, exactly. That was my argument too. But I'm not streaming. But I spent too much time on LimeWire and Napster to give it up, right?
No, he did not, federal government. He was just surfing the web.
They were both out of business by 20 years. I think statute of limitations, wink, wink, are done.
Yeah. Whoever called you a boomer, though, needs to look into their demographic splits. This is not... I mentioned earlier, I've got 3 boys. My eldest will often call me a boomer, and it's like...
Hey, kids.
I don't mind you ripping into me, but let's just get these demographic cuts accurate. Like, just know what you're calling.
You're a few generations off there, sir.
Have you seen the like TikTok trends of like, I don't know, Gen Z saying like, well, life in the late 1900s was like this. It's like,
That's amazing.
That's just math.
so you shut up, you little kid.
Well, you ready to do some nerdery?
Yeah, let's do it.
The nerdery.
Where do you want to start?
I want to start with a little kudos to you, my friend Scotchua. We got a IOP article. So for the non-initiated, Scott and one of our previous guests, Liz Conger, got a submission accepted in the Industrial Organizational Psychology, or it's a commentary.
It's a commentary. Like, yeah, it's not oversell it. That it's a full article.
I'm still proud of you.
But the full article, I can't remember the actual name of it. It doesn't matter.
Well, it's bringing polycultural organizations to life, a network analytics strategy.
Yeah, the actual focal article dealt with this idea of polycultural organizations, which essentially seeks to develop connections across different employee segments, with the idea being that as opposed to, say, multiculturalism, which is, kind of a melding of culture. It's kind of like, this is in a nutshell. It gets a little more sophisticated than this. But, like a melding of culture. Polycultural says, like, different elements of the culture are adaptive. Let's, lean on each other, develop connections across these different groups, and, kind of learn from each other, this sort of thing. Fantastic. But they didn't really provide methods to do it. I saw this, so I do a bunch of network analytics. I got several different strategies that organizations can use to, increase this. I didn't want to get too much into the diversity aspect of this, but rather bringing together different employee segments where we can learn from each other. So, like, Toby, you're in the UK. I want to know more about this. You're a different part of the company than me. Cole brings a different perspective, this sort of stuff. So, I put together, it's like 8 different strategies that organizations can use to help engender connections across different folks.
Well, can I ask you a question about it? Just back, this is kind of a words and terms question of, you mentioned multicultural versus polycultural,
Mm-hmm.
and O&A seems like it's uniquely suited to analyze polycultural circumstances due to the methodological limitation that you mentioned from the focal article. How is it different than how you would analyze multicultural work? And maybe I'm just not understanding the differences there.
No, once again, it gets a little nuanced. So, way they talk about it, like multiculturalism is like a blending of cultures, kind of bringing together different elements. This, in a nutshell,
so it's like a suicide of sodas. So you go to the soda store and you get every soda, and that's multiculturalism.
Yeah, have like multiculturalism fairs. Like, you go and get a little sampler from each little group. Kind of like blend them all together in your belly. If you get this sort of thing. But polyculturalism is like different segments and how to build connections across those segments.
Okay.
Just keeping them as discrete units. The benefits of that, but building those bridges between.
And from a network analytic perspective, there's several different elements that relate directly to this, such as community detections. So a group of individuals that perhaps they have different genders, different ethnicities, different work units, this sort of stuff, but they all collaborate together. They all essentially share knowledge together, so they're going to have a cohesive set, a knowledge base, despite their individual differences. But how can you build bridges across different communities to share those knowledge bases? That's where the real magic starts happening. So, I mean, we talk about these fracture lines, which are kind of artificial between, say, ethnic groups. But if they're in the same group, they essentially have the same knowledge set. So, I mean, talking in these terms, it has value in certain analytic functions. But in reality, you want to share knowledge between these groups, and that's what this is all about.
Would the same strategies work? Obviously, that's between it's polycultural, but would it also work between polyfunctional? So, as you were talking then, I was thinking, we used to do a lot of work combining talent intelligence with market intelligence, with IP litigation, to bring these different elements together to say, okay, what are our, going back to competitive intelligence, what are our competitors doing, and trying to see a holistic picture from everyone. But it feels like it would be similar strategies.
Exactly. And once again, I wanted to stay away from the DEI aspect for this exact reason. because
Yeah.
there's a thing in networking now, it's called modularity, essentially how the network breaks up into different functions, and it's exceptionally useful because there's greater similarity of the people inside those different modules than outside. So from like, oh man, I could go off kind of crazy. There's a thing called like a small world network. So this is essentially like dense interconnected groups, which you have different little communities, but short path links between them. So little bridges across them. So you can reach essentially anyone in the network in 3 or 4 steps. And that's what you really want to do. You don't want like isolated groups. You don't want like big sort of diffuse groups either. You want like these like kind of dense groups that work together closely and can share knowledge across different segments.
Well, I'm personally pro isolated groups and anti collaboration, so I am against your research, sir.
And luckily, it's not really my research. It's just different strategies that people can use. So, like, to Toby's point, like you can use this in sort of any application, really, if you want to like develop connections across people.
Well, that's really cool.
That's super interesting.
It is. It really is. Well, let's go on to our next one, which I'm really curious to see what you guys think about the prevalence of what we're about to share. But I think you came across this, Scott, this Twitter post, X post on this guy, Santiago, says, I fired somebody cheating. He was working 2 jobs, and he gives this whole detailed story about this person on his team who wasn't doing a really good job. Come to find out that he was actually working 2 jobs at the same time. He had never quit his previous job, and since he was remote, he was working now. And they came up with this term, overemployed, which I guess is like a whole trend on the internet. And Scott, I think you had some perspective here too. Do you want to kind of keep going with it?
Oh, well, I mean, perspectives. Like, well, Santiago is a wonderful Twitter follow. He's great. If you're not following him, follow him because he like writes really, really compelling sort of things. It's amazing, right? Someone just like the fucking balls to just like, yeah, I'm gonna. Who knows if he says 2? He could have 8 jobs. It takes a while to be found out and essentially let go. So I mean, like someone could be raking in 8-10 paychecks. Who knows?
Well, so this is the question. I actually have 2 questions about this, right? One is, how prevalent do we think this actually is for remote-based workers? And then the second is, other than people fessing up on Reddit or something like that, how would you find out that this is happening without doing creepy stuff to monitor your employees?
I mean, it feels apocryphal, right? Like no one would actually do this.
No, they're doing it.
Yeah.
I think it's. Have there been isolated cases? For sure. Will people do it? For sure. I don't think it's anywhere near as prevalent as people are making out. And there's arguments. The whole push to return to office. One of the triggers for that was this movement of being overemployed. I'm not convinced. And the bit I when I was reading Santiago's piece, and there's nothing regards to Santiago, but when I was reading it, I thought, well, you're not firing him for the person for being overemployed. You're firing them because they weren't meeting the performance target. And for me, that's the fundamental question. Do I care if any of my employees in life have 2, 3, 5, 10 jobs? No. I care about what they're producing. So if they can have efficiency gains and can produce a week's worth of work in a day because they're hyper efficient and they've built automation into their workflow, et cetera, why should I penalize them for that? Now, equally, I think it's a lot easier in certain countries than others. The UK, it would be really hard to do this because you've got PAYE. If you're employed by a company, they can see if you're double employed. It would be picked up super fast. Unless you're self-employed and you're going in on a contract, it would be super fast picked up. So I don't think it's as big an issue as people think.
You mentioned an acronym PYEE. What is that?
PAYE, which is pay as you earn. So it's essentially as you are paid from your employer, the government will automatically tax you at source. So we don't do annual tax returns in the same way. It's just every single pay slip you're taxed immediately.
Yeah.
So if you were working 2 jobs, the government would immediately see that, and you'd have a different tax code, and so it would immediately get picked up. You're working multi jobs.
That is a clever way. I don't know if it works this way in the US, but a clever way to suss this out, if you really were like trying to dig into it, would be to go to the IRS. You know,
Could you get those records though? I mean, as an employer,
I have no idea. I've never tried to do this,
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, maybe that's a method of going about doing it.
Like going back to the prevalence of this, like this is a specialized person. Like this is the tail end of distribution of someone that would actually do it. I know far more people that have a 40-hour-a-week job and only work 20 hours a week, and the rest of the time they sit there on their ass playing video games. Just don't have the sort of gumption to take up a third job or something like that.
It would be funny or fun if you were at a cocktail party to kind of brag about this. Like if you were doing it, like I've got 3 jobs.
I couldn't take that level of admin, if I'm going to be honest. The amount of admin in one job is enough.
Oh yeah.
I can imagine the admin resources needed for 3 jobs. No, it's not one for me.
Well, is this like an offshoot of like, say, the gig economy? Like this seems to be like, to your point, like
I think this is the logical conclusion of the gig economy. Like this was almost like I guess I would be curious about your perspective about this too, but I saw the gig revolution as kind of a failed revolution. Like there was a point in time where everybody's saying like everybody's going to be a gig worker, and we're seeing this exponential curve and rise in this type of workforce, and it's like plateaued pretty quickly in terms of the types of gig jobs versus non-gig jobs that are going on out there. But if it were to really go up that exponential trend like they projected it to a few years ago, this would have been the conclusion of what it looked like, I feel like.
Yeah. It's like mentally, I don't see it as any different as an Uber driver doing a lift and delivering a pizza at the same time.
Yeah.
It's using your efficiencies.
And that's how Uber Eats was formed.
But I agree. I think it comes down to me, though, for fundamentally as to what are we employing people for. Are we employing them for time, or are we employing them to produce?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're employing people for time, then sure, this overemployment is a real problem, and you've got to work out your timings. But if you're working them to produce, then it should be a productivity piece. Either you as a manager don't have a good hand on what they can produce in a given period of time, or just accept that, if they're producing what I want from them, great. It shouldn't be an issue.
Absolutely.
Well, the manager probably doesn't have a good handle on it, first of all. But second of all, I actually really do agree with you on one point that you made, Toby, about I think a lot of folks use this type of thing as an example to try to push the return to office. And it's a bad example for that. Like, it's not a pervasive problem, right? Or at least statistically speaking, it's not.
So what do you mean? Like just like prevent people from doing this, or just like keep them under the watchful eye of supervisors?
Yeah.
But then the flip side, most companies going back to the office aren't going back for 5 days. So if you were overemployed, for argument's sake, you just go into one office for 2.5 days and the other office for 2.5 days. Like,
brilliant.
I love that.
We can keep it going. It's not dead yet.
You need to find 2 offices that are next to each other. Just kind of see everybody.
As long as it's within the same city, you're going to be fine. It's going to be no problem at all.
I mean, like delivering for Uber Eats is one thing, but like the cognitive load of like just trying to keep everyone's name straight and like who the players are at 2 knowledge jobs would be like.
They might be doing the same. You could just get an Uber together to the other office every Wednesday.
Third option.
All right, I'm going to move us on to our last nerdery topic. And I had sent this to you a while back, Toby. Dr. John Sullivan is somebody we've mentioned a few times on the podcast, and this is a relatively new one of his articles called "Using Weaponized Recruiting Tools to Achieve Talent Domination by Shifting to an Aggressive Competitor Strategy." And in the article, he talks about some of these concepts like hire to hurt, a direct raid on a competitor, team lift outs, recruit industry icons for attraction and branding, purposefully hurt your competitors' recruiting capabilities. And I could go on. I guess like we've cited John Sullivan a few times on here, I'm noticing a trend in his articles. They're getting a little bit more radical every article he writes in terms of like, I don't know, controversial or just maybe I'll just even call it mean. They're just mean spirited. Um, I guess I'm really curious to talk to you, Toby, about since you've been in this industry for a while, you've been on kind of the intelligence side, not just the sourcing side. Do you think it's, I guess, a two-part question. Do you think it's worth using these weaponized recruiting tactics? And do you think that organizations who do employ them actually do get ahead in the long run? Or does this end up hurting them more in the long run?
So, to carry, I don't think many are doing a lot of this stuff. They might do it in isolated pockets. It's most
Mm-hmm.
aren't. It's a natural conclusion. If you assume that there's the war for talent, then this is a natural conclusion.
Yeah, let's go scorched earth if we're at war, right?
For sure that you can do this stuff. I made recommendations, and that's right. It was this sort of work that got me into talent intelligence. When I was in a defense firm many years ago, and there was a cyber security person we were trying to hire, and it was a specific accreditation for the UK government, and you could only get this accreditation if you employed someone with that accreditation, and then they get the whole team accredited. But you couldn't just send a team away. And we kept looking for this person, and there were only 13 of them in the whole country that did this stuff. And I remember going through, and they weren't getting paid a huge amount. They were on 30, 40K. We were offering them 60. They were getting counter offered 90. And so I just went to the head of cyber and the finance leader and said, look, let's just take them all. Take all 13 of them, give them 100 grand, 150 grand a year, doesn't make a difference. Take them all for a year, 2 years, whatever we can afford, whatever we can get signed off. Because it would cost us whatever it was at the time, 10 million quid, 15 million quid, whatever it was. But the market opportunity, you can't bid for any UK government cybersecurity work if you didn't have these people in place. So the market was the entirety of the UK cybersecurity government market for a year. And the head of cyber was up for it, but the finance wouldn't sign off on it. But this sort of work, this disruptive hiring, disruptive practices, is something that does go on. We used to target, when we were doing program bid work, we'd look at, okay, what's the program delivery team in the competitor? Because you'd know who the competitors were broadly for this work. Who's the program lead for this? If we wanted to disrupt and take that program lead out, what would that do for their capabilities? Who else have they got in that team that we could rip out to affect that? But the reality is, most businesses aren't comfortable signing up for that sort of stuff. Not because they necessarily have a bad taste in the mouth to do it. I think most companies wouldn't mind that. It's the fact that we're now going to be stuck with headcount with no job for it, and finance just don't want headcount sitting there with no job. And there was a big piece
it throws
this year.
off all your ratios and stuff like that.
Exactly, and there was a big piece this year about the FAANG companies hoarding talent, etc. I can't speak for upper echelons of the gods in these FAANG companies, but I've never been in a company where someone's just signed off, here, go hire 1,000 people and just don't do them any work. Like, there's never been a hoarding aspect. It's been, if you've got specific headcount signed off for specific delivery. And equally, individuals wouldn't want to go and work for a company where there's no work to do. So I don't think it's as easy as, I'm a big fan of Dr. John, so I'm a big fan of his work. And these techniques absolutely can happen, but I don't think they necessarily work in as clean cut way as it would suggest.
Would you want to work for this company anyway? Like, or this person? Like, imagine you walked in, they're like, "We're gonna destroy the competition. We're gonna steal their talent. We're gonna do all this sort of stuff." Like warmongering.
We're gonna key their car. We're gonna slash their tires.
Like, I mean, it has like inherent ramifications for the culture of the organization. You probably begin to realize that you were hired because just to fuck over some other competitor, this sort of thing. Like, why am I here? Like, and that also means you're expendable, right?
Yeah.
If there's no work for you at that point. I think that the earlier point around, like, is this a one-time deal or is this a continuous sort of process? Because, like, HR recruiting, it's a pretty small world, right? They talk to each other, and these are situations like the prisoner's dilemma, right? If it's a one-time deal, if you want to screw someone over, then by all means, but there's a lot of symbiotic relationships.
You're getting a whole tit for tat type relationship. I do something to you, you do something to me back.
Or you're going to wind up like college football, where like you just raise the stakes so much on each other that it's hard to like all of a sudden you were going to offer someone 100,000 quid. Now it's 200,000. That's the new market value.
And don't get me wrong, like I completely agree. And I think there's a couple of bits that really make me a bit nervous with it. Also, is one is particularly when you start getting into a recruitment process and you're asking some very personal questions. I think there's a line in the sand. It's what's appropriate, what's fair, and what's true. And loading recruitment processes for a corporate intelligence perspective, I've never been a fan of.
Mm-hmm.
I look at that and think, do you know what? That's just not unfair on the candidate. It's unfair on the individual that's being asked to do this, and it gets a bit too close for corporate espionage for my liking. I'm just not a fan of that. But if flip side being, there's been many cases. A lot of the big tech companies got huge fines because they were colluding not to hire from each other. So I think the thought that it's aggressively people targeting or ripping out teams. Can you do it for sure? Like, have I seen of entire teams in financial services being lifted and shifted to other financial services organizations? Yeah, I've seen it happen. But I think, in the same way that TA is a small world, a lot of these VPs, these CEOs, the C-suites, they've all worked with each other. They've been in the same industries for like 15, 20, 30 years. They're all first name basis. They're
exactly.
not let a lot of this stuff slide for very long.
I mean, this is definitely, if you're a psychopath, you'll definitely like this article. So
yeah.
but the flip side being, I am a fan of using talent intelligence, labor market intelligence in a much more aggressive way, in a much more commercially, a bigger commercial application. I think we are generally in HR, we are we hold our data within, and we're not very good at flipping it to what's the commercial impact of this stuff.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that this article does really well, is to highlight actually what we do here. We can massively disrupt commercials for our competitors.
Yeah, it's almost like you're using talent intelligence for competitive intelligence or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Someone should write an article on that.
Yeah, somebody should. Well, I think you had a question for us, Toby, about strategic workforce planning and people analytics and talent intelligence and all of those. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, so I'm seeing more broadly where, and in the book I kind of hypothesize one of the future situations is all of this stuff needs to come together. And I think there's still quite discrete units of people analytics, strategic workforce planning, talent intelligence. What do you see the future being? Do you see these functions and the other talent acquisition analytics or whatever else ones as well? Do you see it all coming together? Do you see it all being one, organization, people science function or people intelligence function, whatever it is? Or do you think they are discretely different and they should have different homes? Or I'd love to hear your takes.
Yeah, I mean, my perspective is I'm living in the future already, Toby. I've been treating them as complementary for a while. I was at a dinner earlier this week where I mentioned I feel like I'm like a one person, trying to be a hero, trying to keep the workforce planning community and the people analytics community connected, because they just seem to be ship sailing in different directions. But I've led workforce planning functions. I led people analytics functions. While I was leading people analytics, I was doing talent intelligence work. I really think they're extremely complementary. And I think most people who don't see them as complementary is just due to ignorance. They're just not familiar with the special superpowers that the other functions give you. And so I'm very much in violent agreement that these three should coalesce over time. And just because I find them all interesting in different ways. So, and I'll even couple in there like the IO psychology skill set is an even additional X factor variable that goes into those three as well. What would you say, Scott?
Well, I mean, like just hearing you talk there, like I'm not sure I'd really draw a distinction between like workforce planning and people analytics. I'm not sure that I see a distinction between the two, and because to your point, they are complementary, and over time, just things become more consolidated. You start out with these little fiefdoms, and they tend to come together. This seems to be a natural order of things. Of course, you need to follow the business needs. Certain organizations may need them separate, some may need them together. So.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen like workforce planning functions that are sitting in like a call center, perhaps. and they have no idea that people analytics even exists, because all they're doing is really highly operational, highly transactional. We got to hire 30 people this week because we know 30 people are going to quit, because it happens every week. And it's just, they don't really see that kind of overlap, but definitely think that they should be. But yeah, Toby, having you on as a guest has been a lot of fun. I've been really looking forward to this for a while, and I've admired what you've been doing in the talent intelligence space for even longer than that. So thank you so much for joining this week. Before I give you the final word, Scott, any parting words for Toby?
Oh, this is the final question. You and your boys going to go to the river today? What are you doing?
Yeah, no. So it's now 6 o'clock. So we've done the river.
A little late.
We're all chilled out. I think it might be a dinner and a dog walk, and that's about it for the evening now.
A little FIFA? Play some FIFA?
Wrong shaped ball for me. I'm more
oh, yeah, you're a rugby guy.
So it's a Rugby World Cup on at the moment. So I might sneak in some rugby there and just not tell them that it's a replay.
Sneak in some rugby, listen to a little Slipknot, have some fun. Let's do it, man. Oh, this is great.
Might even guilty pleasure some Nickelback or something in there as well.
Oh, there you go.
Oh yeah, just rocking out. I feel like there's a Nickelback joke there to be had. But anyway, we'll wrap this thing up. So you've been listening to Directionally Correct, a People Analytics podcast with Cole and Scott, and today's guest, Toby Culshaw. Thanks for joining us, Toby.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.